Les Gold put everything on the line and very nearly lost everything. Using his Detroit business as a platform, the King of Pawn turned it into a reality TV empire. Nevertheless, things were not as straightforward as they appeared to be behind the scenes. There were betrayals of employees, financial difficulties, and a deal that was so scandalous that it made headlines all around the world. Even after Hardcore Pawn was taken off the air, his narrative did not come to an end. The truth of what took place after that is diametrically opposed to what the supporters had anticipated. What really happened to Les Gold after all these years have passed? Chaos, large personalities, and even bigger transactions were the foundations upon which Les Gold constructed Hardcore Pawn. On the other hand, nobody anticipated that the true drama would emerge from within his own store. The American Jewelry and Loan was more than just a television set. A business, a family operation, and a high-stakes battleground for cash, clients, and conflict were all represented by this establishment. Like a well-oiled machine, Les, his son Seth, and his daughter Ashley were in charge of running the establishment. They had to cope with irrational consumers, ridiculous bargains, and even physical altercations on occasion. Which of these is the most heinous? Their own staff, whom they trusted the most, were the ones who provided the information. If you worked in a pawn shop that was prominently broadcast on national television, you would assume that staff would be more cautious, right? An abundance of surveillance cameras, the Gold family keeping a close eye on their every action, and millions of fans tuned in to watch. But that's not the case. Some of the workers become a touch too comfy. Is it one of them here? Exactly the opposite of what Les Gold had anticipated. It is necessary for us to revisit one of the most significant controversies in the history of hardcore pawns. An employee who is trusted was caught stealing without permission. Joe, who is the head of security at the company, is not just any employee either. It's true, you did hear that correctly. The one who was in charge of ensuring the security of the store was the one who stole from it. And he wasn't just getting away with stealing a few inexpensive items here and there. When we talk about stolen jewelry, we are talking about items worth thousands of dollars. Les had a negative impression of it. Something didn't seem to fit together. A trap was set up by him, and he left a valuable diamond ring in a very specific location. He covered it up just enough to give the impression that everyone had forgotten about it. The ring was nowhere to be found the following morning. To be clear, Les is not the kind to freak out. He was aware that something was wrong, but he required evidence. So, he did what any other proprietor of a pawn shop would do. Go over the surveillance footage. And that is when he discovered it. Joe, the individual whom he trusted with matters pertaining to his family, his staff, and his business, was caught on camera stealing jewelry. Not just once, not twice, but over the course of several days. So, let's be honest. It was possible for Les to lose it at that very moment. The individual in question has been a part of his life for more than 3 years. A person who was as close to family as possible. On the other hand, rather than losing his cool, he played it smart. He dialed the 999 number. Joe was kept inside the store by him at all times. On top of that, he pretended as though everything was perfectly normal. That seems to have been the most challenging aspect. Are you able to see yourself standing there and continuing to talk to a guy who has just stolen from you while acting as if nothing was wrong? This is what Les was required to do, simply because Joe would run away if he became suspicious. Moreover, Les was not going to allow it to go place. Joe entered the store like he would on any other day, completely oblivious to the things that were waiting for him inside. While this was going on, Les was already preparing the trap. Now the investigators have arrived. There was a loading of the security footage, and Joe was aware of it the moment he was called to the rear of the room. He was aware that he had reached his limit. But now comes the most bizarre part. Joe acknowledged stealing when he was confronted about it. There is no justification. There are no lies. The confession came out of the blue. And after that, here is where things start to become very crazy. When he reached inside his pocket, he pulled out many handfuls of jewelry that had been taken. More than $77,000 worth of goods and services. Let's pause for a moment. $77,000 will be spent. Putting a couple of rings in your pocket is not the same thing as doing that. That constitutes a serious theft. In addition, this individual had been doing it for an unknown amount of time. In a flash, the police arrived on the scene. On the spot, Joe was taken into custody. And with that, one of Les Gold's most reliable employees was no longer with the company. However, this was not the first time that American Jewelry and Loan had been involved in a covert operation. However, the performance brought to light a much more significant issue: thefts committed by employees even when Les is not aware of them. Not just Joe was involved, this was not the only one. Moreover, each and every one of them felt like a blow to the stomach. Both Ashley and Seth were beyond enraged. They began interrogating each and every person. Could there have been a more significant operation taking place behind the scenes? Since when had this been going on for so long? Whom could one put their faith in? Let me now tell you something. Being employed at American Jewelry and Loan was not a simple task. It was a tight ship that the Golds ran. In spite of this, individuals discovered ways to exploit the situation. Several of the workers became overly comfortable. A few individuals believed that they could outwit the system. However, given that there were cameras mounted on every wall in the location, it was only a matter of time until they were discovered. This is where things start to get even more bizarre. This was not merely a television segment, this was a true statement. In a later interview, Bobby J., who had previously worked at a hardcore pawn shop, stated unequivocally that everything that viewers saw was, in fact, entirely genuine. It was impossible to make it up. There is no drama that has been scripted. Thefts like these, it is true that they do occur. According to Bobby, the entire shop underwent a transformation when Joe was caught. The ambiance was not right. The tension was palpable throughout everyone. Suddenly, every single worker had the impression that they were being observed closely. To tell you the truth, they were. Give it some thought. Les Gold owned a store that contained stuff worth millions of dollars, and it was sitting there. Gold, diamonds, watches, and high-end electrical devices are all examples. In the event that the incorrect person becomes overly greedy, things may vanish in a matter of seconds. Everything was familiar to the Golds. Customers attempting to defraud the company. As a result of low offers, people are becoming violent. Even phony law enforcement officers attempted to rob the establishment. However, when the threat was coming from workers within their own organization, it struck a different chord. But let me tell you something, just one of the many scandals that shook the extreme pawn industry was this one, because something much more significant was taking place at the same time as all of this was taking place. Something that would cause the shop, the show, and Les Gold's entire reputation to be shaken off their feet. It is necessary to travel back in time to the decades before the cameras even started rolling in order to comprehend how Les Gold became the bold businessman that millions of people witnessed on hardcore pawn. The American jewelry and loan industry did not sprout up overnight. This was not the product of a single intelligent investment or a stroke of good fortune. After years of toiling in a field where a single poor transaction may cost you thousands of dollars, and where putting your faith in the wrong person could mean losing everything, it was the result of that dedication. The lessons that Les learned occurred at an early age, and one of them came dangerously close to taking his life. A day that began like any other took a tragic turn in 1971 when Les was working in the pawn store that belonged to his grandpa. This was a long time before Les became a famous figure on television. At approximately noon on the 31st of December, a thief armed with a firearm broke into the store. There has always been a significant level of risk associated with enterprises like pawn shops, particularly in locations like Detroit. They trade in high-end devices as well as expensive cash, jewelry, and gold, specifically the kind of valuables that are targeted by crooks. Les had experienced difficulties in the past, but this time they became more severe in a manner that would continue to torment him for the rest of his life. There was a sudden outbreak of shooting inside the store as the robbery was taking place. It was determined that a police officer who had responded to the area had been killed by gunfire. An additional individual lost his life on that particular day, transforming what ought to have been a monotonous day into a tragic event that left an indelible impression on Les. It was he who was present. He witnessed the event. Despite the fact that he did not sustain any physical injuries, he was aware from that very moment onward that nothing in life could be guaranteed. It is possible that everything may be snatched away in an instant. If someone goes through something like that, the majority of them will never fully recover. Fear is their way of life. They avoid anything that could be considered even marginally harmful. The reverse was done by Les. In order to prevent himself from being broken by it, he made a choice. It was impossible for him to back down. He would never allow fear to control his life, and he would never allow someone to take advantage of him or his livelihood. It was at that point that he altered his approach to dealing with people, business, and even his own workers. As a result of this, Les managed his store with a firm hand when the hardcore pawn industry experienced a surge in popularity several years later. Pawn business was not the only thing that American Jewelry and Loan was. The operation was so large that it processed more transactions in a single day than some banks managed to do in a single day. On a daily basis, more than 1,000 individuals entered those doors. 600 to 800 new loans were written up, and an additional 300 to 400 clients came in to get their belongings. When dealing with so much volume, there is no room for weakness. There is no room for compromise. Speculating is not an option at this point in time. This kind of thinking was reflected in his own personal philosophy by him. It was necessary to win someone's trust, and once it was lost, there was no recovery from the damage. This is the reason why it was such a devastating blow when, after everything he had created and after surviving one of the most horrific times of his life, he was betrayed by someone who was not from their own side. Both a masked thief and an irate consumer were not the source of this information. Someone he had put his faith in, someone who worked behind the counter of his store, was the source of this information. He had taken a chance on this individual. Les has always been a firm believer in the concept of giving people a break. He was aware that life could be challenging at times, and that certain people did not have a pristine record. It was for this reason that he had, over the course of his career, rehired people who had departed the company under doubtful circumstances. Some individuals were going through personal difficulties. Others have made poor choices in the past. In the event that Les believed that they were worth the risk, he would give them another opportunity. According to Amy and Rich, two employees whose return to American Jewelry and Loan had already caused stress behind the scenes, this was the situation that they found themselves in. Even though Amy had worked at the business in the past, the manner in which she had left caused Les to question her dedication to the company. She didn't just give up on us. Suddenly, she vanished. Neither a notice nor an explanation was provided. The next day, she was no longer there. Yet, the day before, she was there. Les would have been finished with her in a normal situation. Nevertheless, her uncle, who had been a devoted worker for many years, approached Les and directly requested that he give her another opportunity. In spite of his better sense, he gave his consent. Seth, who has always been the more skeptical of the two, was adamantly opposed to the decision. He argued that someone who had walked away from something once could easily do it again. On the other hand, Rich had been working for the company for a considerable amount of time. The fact that Les had coached him himself led him to a point where he had entire confidence in his capabilities. However, as time went on, things shifted. Rich started making judgments that were fraught with uncertainty, and Les started to recognize a pattern of conduct that made him feel uneasy. However, he continued to employ him because he was confident that the work experience and training would eventually pay off. What Les failed to recognize at the time was that these decisions, these opportunities for a second chance, were going to backfire in ways that he should not have anticipated. Employees who had been loyal in the past began to take shortcuts, make judgments that put the store in jeopardy, and in certain instances, engage in behaviors that would cause Les to question all he had worked for. But this is the worst part. This was not simply a matter of incompetent management or individuals who did not do their duties. We were talking about something more profound, something that was more perilous. Over the course of several decades, Les Gold has transformed American Jewelry and Loan into one of the most prosperous pawn shops currently operating in the United States. Purchasing and selling were not the only things involved. The issue was one of survival. As a result of his ability to adapt to every difficulty and transform a single store into a multi-location business that served over 1,000 people each and every day, he had witnessed the industry undergo change. When Hardcore Pawn first aired in 2010, he had already established himself as a legendary figure in the pawn industry. On the other hand, fame attracted a new degree of scrutiny. Tensions were rising behind the scenes of the situation. It wasn't just for the sake of television that Les, Seth, and Ashley got into fights. Within the family, there was a genuine struggle for dominance that was taking on. For example, Seth would sometimes make transactions behind his father's back if he believed that they were the best course of action. Seth was an ambitious individual who was always seeking for methods to modernize the firm. Ashley, on the other hand, was not as active in the day-to-day operations of the shop. Yet, when she was, she did not hesitate to challenge both her father and her brother. There were times when it seemed as though the entire family was on the point of disintegrating, and the arguments that took place were real, as was the competition that existed between Seth and Ashley. But despite everything that was going on, Les never lost control. He had been through too much to allow himself to be shaken by the turmoil in his family or the betrayal of his job. His experience of surviving an armed robbery, witnessing individuals lose everything in an instant, and understanding that the only way to succeed in this industry was to keep going forward was what he knew. He continued to be active even after the conclusion of Hardcore Pawn in the year 2015. The American Jewelry and Loan Company continued to thrive, and Les and Seth continued to serve as the company's primary leaders. However, the company continued even though the show had come to an end. Les Gold remained a dominant force in the pawn industry, in contrast to other reality TV stars who fell into oblivion over time. Despite the fact that he did not participate in social media to the same extent as his son, he was still very much visible in the business. Seth assumed responsibility for the majority of the components that were visible to the public. He frequently posted updates, dissected iconic moments from the program on TikTok, and occasionally invited Les to share his perspective. It was at this moment that Les had established an empire. He was an entrepreneur who owned a number of different locations, employed hundreds of people, and had over $1 million worth of goods. The fact that his estimated net worth hovered around $3.5 million is a testament to the fact that he had worked tirelessly for decades and made astute business decisions. Yet, rumors began to circulate despite the fact that he was successful. There were bizarre claims that circulated on the internet for a number of years, suggesting that Les Gold had passed dead. Because of the widespread dissemination of these falsehoods about fake deaths on social media, fans were left wondering whether or not their favorite television pawnbroker had actually passed away. Over and over again, the rumors were shown to be untrue. In addition to being alive and in good health, Les continued to oversee the company that had brought him fame. On the other hand, as time went on, the pawnshop industry began to indicate something that was somewhat more troubling. Keeping personnel in line, negotiating in a heated manner, and selling one-of-a-kind things were not the only concerns. Authentic survival was the focus of the situation. Over the course of the past few years, there has been a discernible shift in the types of clients that come through the doors of American Jewelry and borrowing businesses. Les started seeing a developing pattern, despite the fact that the shop had always served a diverse range of customers, including buyers, sellers, and people who needed quick cash. More and more people were not coming in with the intention of making a profit. For the purpose of generating additional funds for spending, they were not selling collectibles, rare coins, or high-end jewelry. They had to resort to pawning commonplace objects in order to survive. In the past, pawnshops were considered the last choice for dealing with unforeseen financial obligations. An unexpected auto repair, a medical bill, or an emergency that demanded immediate cash have all occurred. Nevertheless, Les asserts that this is no longer the situation. Customers who aren't concerned about the following week or perhaps the following month are the ones he is seeing. The only thing that matters to them is getting through the day. There are a lot of people who come in desperate, so desperate that they pawn their tools, their engagement rings, and even their family heirlooms. They are dependent on these very things in order to make a life. Pawn shops have always been referred to by Les as street-level economists, and there is a solid reason for this. Pawn shops are able to see the true impact of financial difficulties long before the major financial institutions report them. Furthermore, judging by what he is witnessing at this moment, things are not looking good. The difference is astounding at his store, which is located 8 miles away in Detroit. While the number of people waiting in line to redeem their stuff has decreased, the number of persons asking for loans has increased by a factor of 2. Exactly what is going on is communicated to Les by this. Individuals do not possess the financial means to retrieve their belongings. To ensure their survival in the short term, they are selling their valuables. On the other hand, when it comes time to reclaim them, they are unable to finance it. This is not limited to just Detroit. The same behavior is being observed by pawnbrokers all around the country, according to Les, who has spoken to them. It is not uncommon for customers to bring in clothing, equipment, and even electrical devices. This includes items that, 10 years ago, would not have been considered suitable for pawn shops. On the surface, the economy may appear to be solid. Nevertheless, the reality is considerably more difficult for millions of people in the United States. Not only does this change have an impact on customers, but it also has an impact on the firm itself. Since the beginning of time, pawn shops have maintained a balance between selling inventory and offering loans. On the other hand, that results in an imbalance because there are more people pawning and fewer people buying. As a result of customers who are not coming in, stores such as American Jewelry and Loan are keeping more things than they ever have before in their inventory. Despite the fact that loans continue to be a reliable source of money, the resale market has slowed down, and even loans come with their own set of concerns. Even in the face of all this, Les continues to adapt, as he has done throughout his whole life. Although he has seen economic downturns in the past, he is under the impression that this time things are different. Inflation and recession are not the only factors at play here. In other words, it is about a significant shift in the way that people are living their lives. The use of pawn shops as a short-term solution is no longer something that they rely on. They are dangling them as a means of survival. And then there are the tales that serve to remind everyone of the reasons why hardcore pawn was such a craze in the first place. When you enter through the door, you will see stuff that are strange, unexpected, and sometimes extremely implausible. Les has witnessed a wide variety of things throughout the course of his life, ranging from ancient antiques to high-end sports automobiles. But what is among the most shocking of these experiences? It was once the van that Dr. Jack Kevorkian, also known as the notorious Dr. Death, possessed. When Kevorkian walked into American Jewelry and Loan with his van, Les immediately saw that this was not simply another transaction. Kevorkian was recognized for his controversial role in cases involving assisted suicide. Les was able to purchase the item for a low price of $20,000, despite the fact that the seller had initially requested $40,000. Was it indeed worth it? Probably not in terms of resale value, but for Les, just the fact that he was able to own a piece of history, regardless of how gloomy it was enough to justify making the trade. Aside from his professional life, Les also made time to volunteer his services. In spite of the fact that he had always been known for his strong negotiating skills, he also had a more approachable side. He had a significant role in the Heat and Warmth Fund, also known as THAW, which is a charitable organization established in Detroit that assists families with low incomes in paying their heating expenses. Throughout the years, he utilized his position to organize charitable events that resulted in the collection of tens of thousands of dollars, thereby positively impacting the community in which he lived. Despite the fact that he was no longer appearing on television, Les continued to be a significant player in the pawn industry. He had authored a book titled For What It's Worth, Business Wisdom from a Pawnbroker, which was a bestseller on the New York Times in 2013. The book provided readers with an insider's perspective on the business world, as it was written by a man who had spent his whole life improving his skills in the field. In spite of everything that has happened, Les Gold has not changed much from the person he has always been: a businessman, a negotiator, and a survivor. Despite the fact that hardline pawn shops are no longer on the air, the American jewelry and loans industry is still very much active, and Les is still at the center of it all. The type of person who would retire, walk away, or slow down is not him. At the end of the day, the pawn business is still about the same thing, which is knowing people, making clever deals, and constantly being one step ahead of the competition. Of course, the industry has changed, the economy has shifted, and the consumers have various needs, but one thing remains the same: understanding people. For those who are curious about what transpired with Les Gold, the answer is straightforward. So far, he is continuing to do what he does best. In addition, Les Gold will continue to exist for as long as there are people who are in need, as long as there are opportunities to do transactions, and as long as the American jewelry and loan industry continues to exist.